Hello. Thank you, Shiloh.
All right, why don't we get going slowly? Uh, Again, good morning to you, Earthlings, and thank you for coming. Today give you a little talk that's really more contemplation as to how humans are imagining aliens. And this is somewhat expanded version of a talk I gave at the conference earlier a few weeks ago in Corfu in Greece. And you'll see why I'm interested in the subject, aside from being an astronomer. So the basic idea here, but before I try that, let me remind you, I'll be talking in voice, and everybody else mute your mic and use text. And as far as the questions are concerned, please type them in the text chat. I'll show you how. So you always proceed with capital letters, question, colon, then ask whatever it is. That way I can easily recognize questions in the overall text stream. But I may not be answering any of them until I'm done. Okay, thank you. All right, so what I'll be doing today is talking really how have humans been imagining aliens, intelligent species elsewhere in the universe? And this is becoming very much a scientific subject. First of all, there is a whole blooming branch of astronomy called the exoplanetology. We now know almost 6,000 of confirmed planets around other stars and somewhat fewer number of planetary systems, but probably all of them come in planetary systems. And then just from the sample statistics, we can extrapolate that there are more planets than there are stars in the Milky Way galaxy. The Milky Way galaxy has about 200 billion stars. So that's a lot of planets. And approximately 1 in 5 of sun-like stars, which are some fraction of all stars, have Earth-sized planet, which is in the habitable zone, which we define as range of radii from the parent stars where water can be liquid on the surface of the planet. Too close and it evaporates, too far and it freezes. This doesn't necessarily mean that life must always have liquid water, but it's as good thing as any. And what we know that chemistry is same everywhere in the universe. There are same chemical elements. Planets are common, and whatever happened on Earth probably happened elsewhere. But we don't have any direct evidence for it yet. People are working on it though. There is a huge NASA project being planned now called HABEX for Habitable Worlds Explorer, which would be sort of same caliber mission as James Webb Space Telescope is today. And James Webb, as well as large telescopes on the ground, are being used to study exoplanets. So the chemistry of life is based largely on carbon as a special element because it's very chemically reactive, produces great wealth of interesting chemicals, including very complex ones, and water. And both of those are highly abundant in the universe. We detect all kinds of molecules in interstellar space. We now even detect some on the planets that have been detected by James Webb or big telescopes on the ground. And there is no shortage of possibilities of complex molecules that life requires. I've even read a report that they've seen molecules that are amino acids in interstellar clouds. I'm not sure that was confirmed, but anyway, complex molecules do exist in the universe and they're fairly abundant. So here are some recent data from James Webb Space Telescope. It is used to image directly planets around other stars, which is really hard thing to do from the ground because they're close in the sky next to each other, and planets approximately 1 billion times dimmer than the parent star, so it requires some special equipment in going to space. But even from the ground, we have detected some. Now, not only that, but we can obtain spectra of these planets, which can tell us about chemical composition of their atmosphere. And here is one example, planet's called WASP-39b. And you can see it has water, it has carbon dioxide, monoxide, all kinds of other stuff, pretty much kind of molecules that we would expect to see in a planet capable of sustaining life. It doesn't mean there is life there, but it's at least a possibility. And so this is no longer fantasy. We're pretty sure, even though we don't have any direct evidence for it yet, that there's got to be life elsewhere in the universe because there are a lot of opportunities for it to arise elsewhere. And then, just as happened on planet Earth, evolution takes over and eventually may result in intelligence. All right, so this is something that people have been worrying about, or wondering about for a long time, thousands of years. And even ancient Greek philosophers, especially Anaximander, speculated about other worlds, way before Copernicus, and what kind of creatures may live there. And I love this quote that I've written here. Anarchus, who was teacher of Alexander the Great, told him that there was infinite number of worlds and other people and so on. And Alexander was very sad because he couldn't conquer them all. A very typical human reaction, which actually will cover a lot of the stuff that I'll tell you about later. Well, after classical Greece, we went through a period of dark ages, but then with the Copernican revolution, things really picked up because that was the thinking that, yes, sun is just one star, or it's just one planet. Why not there have been many more? I mean, that did not go well with the prevailing dogma, as Giordano Bruno found out. But the idea could not be killed, especially with Galileo's discoveries in the early 17th century. It really took off to speculate about, are there planets elsewhere, live creatures on them, or even solar system planets and so on. As astronomy developed with telescopes and whatnot, and era of enlightenment, when people started thinking about things that are further away from the religious dogma, we've seen some very interesting speculations from some very capable people, including Christian Huygens, who is one of the great scientists of Baroque and Enlightenment era. Among other things, he wrote this book called Cosmotheros, and he speculated very extravagantly of what kind of creatures may be inhabiting other planets, both in the solar system and outside. pure speculation, but nevertheless, based on whatever they knew back then. There were many others. One that was well known about this was de Fontenelle, who wrote didactic books, and in them he also speculated about creatures that live on the moon, on other stars, even on the sun, I think. But again, those were just speculations and kind of encouraged by the advances in astronomy at the time and thinking went beyond just the planet Earth. So that kept, circulating through public culture and so on for a while. And there was a very famous hoax in 1835, a newspaper, Sun, which is in US, published a series of articles which were pure fabrications, like the original fake news, about how John Herschel, the son of William, who was a famous astronomer on its own, had this amazing big telescope made in South Africa, and he can see on the moon, there are all these live creatures, and they do all kinds of stuff. You can see some of the illustrations from it, and that sold like hotcakes. People, even if they suspected that, maybe this isn't quite true, just love this idea. And noticed also that these inhabitants of the moon, cavorting there with a little pond, are basically humans with bat wings. And that is another big theme that comes through, that whenever we imagine what extraterrestrials may look like, we basically take what we know on planet Earth and then kind of do maybe a little shuffling of bits and pieces. But it's extremely rare to imagine something that is not corresponding to direct human or at least terrestrial experience. And I think there are profound reasons for that. So this hoax worked for a while, and until it was debunked. Even John Herschel himself, he was very amused by it. It had nothing to do. But here are illustrations from a book that was produced by Leopoldo Galuzzo in Naples, inspired directly by this series of articles. And you can see that humanish inhabitants of moon are basically humans with bat wings and fur. And you see this on the right. And then there are all kinds of animals, which gosh, just look like just terrestrial animals, except slightly different. That bison has one horn instead of maybe two, and so on and so forth. So right away, you can see that people just didn't have mental capacity, if you will, to imagine something that's different from what they've seen on planet Earth. And of course, this is probably pretty silly from our viewpoint, but that's what happened. Now this continues. Sun newspaper increased their circulation dramatically because of this, even after it was known to be a fraud, because people just love that kind of stuff. And so, of course, we see that even today at supermarket counters. You can see this very often, all the amazing news about space aliens interacting with people on planet Earth. And I don't know about Hillary cheating on Bill with space aliens, but the one on the right about the 12 U.S. senators of space aliens, I don't believe that. There's got to be at least 100 of them. Okay. I know, especially in House of Representatives, I would say maybe a couple hundred. So that does not really hurt the circulation of these papers, even though everybody knows this is bullshit. But back to historical things. Things really picked up, say, in the late 19th century. And after Giovanni Schiaparelli, Italian astronomers, misunderstood what he saw through his telescope on planet Mars, that there are these lines, which turn out to be complete optical illusion, he called them canals. And Percival Lowell, a very wealthy astronomy enthusiast from Boston, bought in it hook, line, and sinker. And he built himself a Sirius Observatory. It was one of the leading observatories for a while in Arizona, in Flagstaff, and specifically to study this ostensible civilization on Mars, that built canals that would transport water from polar regions of Mars, because they knew even then that Mars had polar caps, into the more desert-like interior of the planet. And he believed it completely. He was a serious scientist. Incidentally, Flagstaff's global observatories where Clyde Tombaugh discovered Pluto. And people really started believing that there really are Martians out there, and that spawned a lot of different cultural follow-up phenomena. Probably the most famous of which was the War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells, one of the foundational books of science fiction, if you will, which is extremely well written. And in it, Wells, who was a socialist, was really making oblique critique of the Victorian society with colonialism, etc., and Martians desire to get our resources, come and conquer Earth, kill Earthlings as needed, and so on, superior weapons. And that kind of colored a lot of subsequent science fiction. Probably a famous follow-up of that was the radio play in 1930s, produced by Orson Welles, which really put him on the map, in which he packaged the play as if it was real news and caused massive panic on the eastern seaboard of the United States, that people really thought Martians are here and have the death beams and coming to conquer Earth. So that started real production of similar fiction for many years to come. And all of it tends to be of the same nature. And the evil Martians come to conquer Earth. They're merciless, and they come here because they want to get Earth's resources. Now, why Martians? Well, we named the planet after a god of war. So, amazingly enough, Martians knew that. And of course, they have to be warlike. But it makes you also wonder, what did Venusians do while the Martians are conducting wars? All right, well, speaking of which, as science fiction started to blossom, and there was this golden era of science fiction, 30s to 50s, if you look at covers of some of those pulp fiction magazines, you can't help but notice that for some reason, alien monsters, and they're always monsters, seem to have an amazing interest in human females, especially buxom and scantily clad variety. Right? Who could have guessed that, something completely non-human-like would be interested in it? Well, of course, publishers of these things knew exactly who their audience was, and, well, that sells. So a lot of science fiction that resulted from all this wasn't all that, and a lot of it was essentially projections of bad things that people have done on planet Earth, like conquering and killing and wars and stuff like that, and also harassing human females, but not all. There is some excellent science fiction that was written about aliens and what they might be like and what they might do. And of course, before I give you good examples, I can't possibly pass up on The Alien, which is probably a story that's older than humanity itself, right? It could have been saber-toothed tiger monster in a cave eating proto-humans, or now there is a big space monster in a spaceship eating humans. This fear is somehow evolutionary built into us, and of course this sells, which is why there is so many sequels of Alien being produced. Right. Now, here is something else. There's Star Wars saga, which is not science fiction at all. It's basically medieval saga plus Western plus Nazis plus a whole bunch of other cliches that Hollywood has deployed, and because of that, it sells extremely well. But because they use spaceships instead of horses, doesn't make it science fiction. I mean, you have feudal society, princesses, emperors, sword fights. Even though they have spaceships that travel between stars, they still have sword fights, and so on. So, to me, this is sort of the nadir of science fiction or aspiring science fiction, showing just how little imagination humans actually have. They just can't think of anything new. They don't want to think of anything new. This is probably why Star Wars is so popular, because people don't have to think beyond what they know already. Anyway, can't argue with the commercial success. And incidentally, I think Star Trek is much more respectable in that regard, even though they are aliens, essentially humans with some facial prosthetics and makeup. But the storylines are much more interesting. Okay, let me tell you about some of my science fiction favorites in this particular arena. First of all, Arthur C. Clarke, who was one of the greatest science fiction writers ever lived, maybe the greatest one, had an interesting evolution in his work, and illustrated by these three novels. In the 1950s, when he really started writing, he wrote a book called Childhood's End. Basically, aliens come in, they're benevolent, by and large. They bring some amazing new technologies to humans as a gift, but they also want something in return. And I won't tell you what, because I spoil it. And then in the late 60s, Apollo program era and all that, he wrote 2001, Space Odyssey. And there, aliens show up, never see them, they're just at these black monoliths that appear at crucial junctions of evolution of humanity and somehow inspire transformation to the next evolutionary stage. So they come, they do something good for us, they don't ask for anything in return, we never see them. And then there is a rendezvous with Rama, that essentially an interstellar spaceship comes through the solar system. There is even a spaceship that is human spaceship that can board it and take a look at it. And essentially, the aliens behind its interstellar ship have no interest in humanity whatsoever. They don't show up, they don't give us anything, they don't ask for anything. They're just passing through. Zero interest in humanity. Which I suspect is probably the most realistic of these perspectives of what might happen. Now, of course, when a few years ago, when we detected for the first time interstellar asteroid or comet that went through the solar system called Oumuamua, I mean, we knew such things had to exist as a natural byproduct of planetary formation, but we just never had the data to find one. We now do. There's more than one that's been seen. And my old friend from Harvard, Professor Avi Loeb, was brilliant, or was a brilliant theorist, unfortunately just went nuts about this and started writing strange books and doing strange things. But hey, if that makes him happy, why not? Another author that I really like is Stanislaw Lem. He's not well known, Polish science fiction writer from the same era as Arthur Clarke. And in particular, two books of his I find are especially interesting in that regard. The Solaris, on the left, which was actually turned into a movie twice. First time by Andrei Tarkovsky, great Soviet director, and then by George Clooney. Personally, I like George Clooney's version better because Djorgovski is a little too artsy for me. But anyhow, the plot here is there is a research station on a planet that is completely covered by an ocean. The name of the planet is Solaris. And weird things happen to the researchers and astronauts that are there. And yet, what happens in the end, they figure out that the ocean itself, which covers the entire planet, is an intelligent being. But it is in an early stage, it's essentially an infant planetary intelligent ocean. And all the nasty things that are done to astronauts is like babies go and break things and just to find out what's going on. So how would you communicate with planet-sized intelligent ocean? Interestingly enough, now we know there are such planets out there. There's like a gigantic water drop, maybe with some rocky core, but they probably do exist. Another one of Lem's books that I enjoyed is called His Master's Voice, and the plot there is an extraterrestrial message is detected that required certain high degree of scientific development on planet Earth. And eventually they managed to decode it. And what it gives us is a powerful new technology. But unlike any other technology in human history ever, which could always be used for good or for bad, starting with rocks and sticks, you can use as tools or to bash another hominid's skull, or fire that you can use to cook meal or burn another village, or nuclear energy. This time, this technology had a built-in safety that essentially precluded people from using it for destructive purposes, which will seem like there is a real intelligence in civilization. Here is something you can use for good, but not for bad. And of course, never see the aliens who sent us. And finally, another one that I want to mention is called The Roadside Picnic by two brothers, Arkady and Boris Djorgovski, Soviet Union. Now, Soviet science fiction, by and large, wasn't all that interesting because every future society, whether on Earth or outside the Earth, had to be communist because, of course, right? The Strugatskys were actually really good writers. And so the plot of this book is alien starships or something come to Earth, several of them in a line. They're landing zones. Nobody ever actually sees them. And then they go away. They come in, did not announce themselves. We don't know why they come. Then they leave. We don't know where or why. However, in the landing spots, there is a lot of debris. And some of it is examples of amazing new technologies, some of which humans can actually make work even though they don't understand. And the idea here is that essentially this is like if you were going on a road trip and have a little picnic by the road, on the side of the road. Then you pick up your stuff and you go wherever you're going. But what's left is some crumbs of your food. And then ants come and get those crumbs. And for them, they're like a miracle of advanced civilization. So obviously, we're the ants in that parable. That, too, I think, is probably closer to the truth to the extent there is one at all. Okay, well, of course, one of the major phenomena, cultural phenomena, is the existence of religion, and gods live in the sky, and so, of course, that had to be a religious connection. So, a mediocre science fiction writer, L. Ron Hubbard, realized this, and he was actually quoted on record saying that, well, writing bestseller books is fine, but if you really want to get rich, you invent a religion. So he did, and found sufficient number of gullible Hollywood types and elsewhere. And it's a brilliant, booming business. I mean, not as successful as the Catholic Church, which is probably the greatest business in human history, not even as much as Mormon Church, but nevertheless, nice chunk of cash. And the official scriptures of the Scientology religion are bad science fiction, you can see here. On the other hand, I'm not really sure that that's any more silly than the official scriptures of any other religion on planet Earth. So, gods live in the sky and come here and somehow have interest in us and do things. All right, so we have to talk about UFOs, which is essentially a modern neurosis, and I'll tell you why I think that. UFO sightings really began, there are some old ones, but really began after World War II, where people understood things like aerial warfare and invasion and rockets and stuff like that. And again, aliens are imagined as somewhat distorted humans, insectoid-looking humans, and they're basically part of folklore today. The whole alien UFO set of beliefs is modern folklore. It's kind of interesting to think that, advanced civilizations that would fly across interstellar spaces to planet Earth and do nothing, maybe mutilate some cows, but why would they do such a thing? And one particular aspect of the data is this. Here's the map of locations of all UFO sightings until 2014. And each yellow dot is one sighting. So isn't it amazing how they come across interstellar space and they know exactly what borders of Canada and Mexico are? Talk about American exceptionalism, right? So in addition to US, UK is also popular, and so is the Netherlands. But elsewhere, not much. So one must wonder, why these countries, and why specifically United States as world's leader in UFO sightings. Nevertheless, people are taking this seriously because there are sometimes things that we cannot explain on the basis of existing data. It doesn't mean that there are spaceships. It just means we don't have enough data. And NASA and Department of Defense are actually spending some resources to look into everything that may even slightest chance of having something to do with extraterrestrial visits. Well, anyway, I think this map is kind of pretty much telling you why UFOs are essentially social phenomenon and not a physical phenomenon. Now, one part of the whole UFO mythology are abductions. It turns out there is actually a nice little genre of psychiatric literature devoted to this, what causes people to have these fantasies. But you know the story that sometimes some person in some isolated spot is pulled by a tractor beam into UFO, where they're subjected to medical examination, shall we say, and which often involves anal probing. Now, you don't have to be Sigmund Freud to figure out where this one comes from, right? And I think prevailing belief in psychiatric literature is that people who report on this have undergone trauma of some kind, and so on and so forth. All right. All right, let's get back to science. I mean, this issue of intelligent life in the universe was taken very seriously by scientists for many decades now. And with the advent of radio astronomy after World War II, which was built on the advent of radars from World War II, astronomers like Cocconi and Morrison and Drake decided that we can listen for radio signals from extraterrestrial civilizations. It's called SETI, or Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, and it's an enterprise that's still going on today. But the underlying assumption behind it is that an advanced civilization will first of all choose to communicate, and they will use the mid-20th century planet Earth technology to do so, and in a way that we can understand, which to me is sort of like pinnacle of anthropocentric delusion. This is actually not all that new. And again, one of the kind of streams that go through this, always, what is it that we know how to do today? Well, turns out, this began with the invention of radio, 100 years ago, 100 plus years ago. That Tesla, Marconi, and Edison, great inventors all believed they detected radio signals from Mars the moment they knew how to detect radio waves. And they thought they were detecting them on frequencies around 3 kilohertz, because that's what first radios could do. They didn't know about the existence of the ionosphere around planet Earth, and 3 kilohertz radio waves do not go through it. Ionosphere is like a Faraday cage. So whatever they're detecting is some kind of noise, maybe had to do with thunder and lightnings and so on. But nevertheless, they really bought into it completely. And those people are not dumb, or gullible. They're among the greatest inventors ever. But here are samples from their writings about it, and you can read it yourself. They totally believed it. And Marconi even thought that the Martians are sending us message in Morse code. Well, not only they choose whatever was the state of technology on planet Earth then, but they actually knew about Morse code. That's just pretty much same kind of reasoning as to why they're all landing in the United States. So this is interesting. I think this was essentially based on the whole Mars hype that started with Percival Lowell and Canals on Mars. That was kind of in the spirit of the time that people really believed that, yes, there's got to be intelligent civilization on planet Mars. And so even if they can't fly here, maybe they're sending us telegrams or something like that. So being smart and being at the cutting edge of technology is not a guarantee that we would approach the subject in a meaningful fashion. And unfortunately, that still goes on today. Radio astronomy is way more advanced now today, even much more advanced from the first experiments in SETI, Project Ozma, and such. The receivers are vastly better now. We know about the ionosphere, but the core idea is still the same. An advanced civilization chooses to communicate with us using our current technology in a way that we can understand. Interestingly enough, after lasers were invented and used for communications, people said, oh, maybe they're using the radio pulses, and the shortest pulses that can make with lasers early on, there were maybe milliseconds, and so they looked for millisecond laser pulses from stars, and now they're building a project called PanoSETI, which is looking for nanosecond pulses or lasers from advanced civilizations, because now we can do nanoseconds. Well, same thing in different packaging. Which brings me, of course, to the Fermi paradox, which was formulated by a great physicist Enrico Fermi and a couple of his colleagues in Los Alamos, circa 1950. And basic reasoning is here, well, there are hundreds of billions of stars and planets in the Milky Way alone, and then there are a couple hundred billion galaxies. The progress in rocketry was going very well, from almost nothing before World War II to space race started in the 1950s. And so everybody naturally extrapolated that sooner or later we'll learn how to fly to other stars. Things are going to get better. And it's not crazy extrapolation. Maybe a can happen. It may take us another 1,000 years to learn how to do that. But what's 1,000 years compared to the age of planet Earth or the age of the universe? So on planet Earth, it took 4.5 billion years to go from nothing, just hot rocks, to humans. And for humans, it took maybe 10, 20,000 years from the beginnings of civilization to flying probes out in space. So it's pretty reasonable to assume that similar type of evolution might happen elsewhere. And eventually, if interstellar travel is possible at all, practical at all, you might fly between stars at some fraction of speed of light, 1%, 10%, whatever you like. And Milky Way galaxy is 50,000 light years across. So even if you go at 1/10 of speed of light, then it will take you 500,000 years to pretty much conquer all of the galaxy, or even 1%. Well, 5 million. That's still much, much less than the age of the Milky Way. So why aren't we seeing any? Where are they? And the underlying assumption here was, why, yes, these advanced civilizations will do exactly what we would do right now if we had interstellar travel technology. Again, go and conquer, right? That, I think, is the biggest flaw in this. We, of course, cannot possibly know what truly advanced minds and civilizations would want to do, any more than less advanced creatures on planet Earth can understand what we're doing. There are, I think, over 100 possible solutions proposed for Fermi paradox, but to me, the most likely fall in two categories. Either they're just actually not interested in interstellar travel and colonization. There is something else much more interesting, or they may actually become uploads in computers, and God knows why. Or alternatively, there actually could be a lot of very advanced alien technology all around us, but we're just not capable of recognizing it. And so let me give you a little example of that. Before we get to that. So my solution to Fermi paradox. Imagine there is this troop of monkeys somewhere in the jungle, and they're hunting for grubs and maybe bananas or whatever. And there is a jumbo jet flying overhead, 12 kilometers up. So monkeys, which have a reasonable amount of intelligence, they probably would never notice the contrail. But if they did notice the contrail, that's some kind of weird long cloud. And they couldn't possibly imagine what that thing is, how it works, or why. And even if somehow you could give them super good telescope saying, look, this is what it is. There's this flying machine out there. They would have no idea how such a thing could possibly exist and how it works or any of that. Well, there may be equivalents of jumbo jets flying all around us, and we, the somewhat advanced monkeys, simply couldn't possibly comprehend that there are such things. All right, so you notice that the underlying theme here is that the ways we look at this are very anthropocentric, or at least Earth-centric. And with some colleagues, we started thinking, like, can we actually do something more meaningful about this? What is it that we really know that we can count on? And the upshot is, we know, pretty sure, we actually tested this in some ways, that mathematics, physics, chemistry, and information theory are universal, not even biology. Everything else is up for discussion. There could be different biology. There could be intelligence not based in biology, and so on. We also know that there is plenty of planets, Earth-like or otherwise, and there are plenty of opportunities for life to evolve. Another general thing that we believe is true is that living organisms, intelligent or not, and civilizations have underlying principle. They consume energy in order to live, and they generate entropy, waste heat, if you will. And this is why they can exist at all. They're open thermodynamical systems. They increase entropy of their environment so that they can create information, which is negative of entropy. And so they're entropy sources in their environment, and they're also information sources, creating all the information that we do. And some of it leaks out in space through radio waves. This is not sufficient to be able to find such things because many natural phenomena, astrophysical sources, also are big entropy generators. And a lot of stars, especially young stars, are obscured by dust. And so they do this conversion from starlight into the thermal radiation. And there were proposals to look for sources like that while the infrared astronomy was still young. And notably Freeman Dyson, a great physicist, came up with the idea of Dyson spheres that basically said, well, a civilization, a rapidly advancing civilization, needs all the energy it can get. And what they could do is try to get all of their parent stars' energy, solar energy on a grand scale, by having essentially solar panels all around their stars, and then that energy is used for whatever civilization does, and there is a waste heat. However much energy you get in, that much you have to get out, but it will be in infrared thermal radiation. So when we had first infrared observations from space, people looked for that, and they found out, oh, well, there is a lot of regular stars that are shielded in dust, which do exactly the same thing. So another interesting thing, now this is more of an anthropocentric conclusion, because this is what happened here, is that intelligences, whether individual or collective, interact within their environment, have invent technology, and then co-evolve between the living organisms, however they originate, and the technology they create. Now you can see that this is essentially what happens on planet Earth. Oh, I mean, we invent technology, and technology changes us, like evolving opposable thumbs to grab sticks and stones, and now artificial intelligence and everything in between. So intelligence, well, life itself, but intelligence in particular, what in physics is called emergent phenomena. It's something that naturally results in sufficiently complex systems. Even though you cannot predict it, it's not obvious from the foundational equations or anything like that. But if you have a system of a certain complexity, it naturally happens that more complex structures keep arising. Now, that theory of complexity and emergence is not nearly as well developed as I wish it was, but there is something that sounds right about it on a universal basis, even, I would say. Now, look, even on planet Earth, we know there are non-human intelligences, and it's not just cetaceans like dolphins and whales, but dogs and cats and horses and monkeys, and most mammals have some form of intelligence. And I'm sure if you have a pet, you can swear that your cat or a dog knows exactly what you're telling them. You know? And they do have a certain amount of intelligence, even if you overestimate them. But, you know, your dog or a cat couldn't learn theoretical physics. Why? Oh, because the complexity of their brains is just insufficient for that level of information processing and understanding. And probably the same thing for dolphins and whales. I mean, they know how to feed and all that, but that's it. That's where the culture stops. So we communicate in a limited way. We're still discovering languages, if you will, of whales or dolphins and so on. There is no question that they can communicate in some causal fashion, but not like we can. All right, so what can we do about this? Interstellar travel is simply impossible for us right now. But maybe even with whatever technology you have, speed of light may be the universal speed limit. There are no wormholes, shortcuts, and it just takes too long. Even if you go at some fraction of speed of light, it still takes too freaking long to go somewhere, right? And that requires vast amounts of energy, even for smallest interstellar spaceship. So maybe nobody's actually traveling because it's so impractical. Why would you do such a thing? Because all you need to do is convey information and not convey atoms from there to here. So this is an example of what Dyson sphere might look like, that instead of looking for UFOs populated by bug-like aliens, maybe we should look for large-scale manifestations of truly advanced technology. And Dyson sphere would one thing that we can imagine, but doesn't mean that such things actually exist. And so now this is the latest fad, if you will, well, not fad, but latest direction in SETI. It's looking for techno-signatures of advanced civilizations. In studying exoplanets, there is a branch of that called exobiology. Can we detect signatures of life, like presence of chlorophyll on surfaces of planets, or methane, which on the Earth is produced by cows, and so on. But in addition to signatures of life, biosignatures, we can look for technosignatures, evidence for advanced technology. All right. So what did we do about this? We decided that the best way to do this, with the minimum number of assumptions that do not rely on human history, culture, anything, is we now have vast amounts of data collected in all different wavelengths over the entire sky, and repeatedly, again and again, we detect billions of stars and quasars and galaxies and whatever, and we measure hundreds of parameters for each one of them. Now, things of given physical type, like stars, form clusters in that gigantic multidimensional space of measurable parameters. And galaxies do, and quasars do, and so on. So the space of all these properties is not uniformly populated, like things group together. And we can then look for sources in the sky that in some quantifiable, statistically significant way do not belong to any one of the natural clusters, or what we call outliers in machine learning. And we have tools to do that. And we're just getting enough compute power and enough good data to be able to conduct such grand analysis, looking for things that are different in some well-understood way. This is not an easy thing to do, by the way, but I won't go into details. So we had a whole workshop about that, and we wrote a report, which is available online. You can download and look at it yourself. It's posted on Archive, which is the website that has all of physical sciences publications, but also for your convenience, here is a copy at tinyurl.com/technosignatures, and that will give you a PDF file. And needless to say, we haven't found any yet, otherwise you would have heard about it. So that also leads to this issue of evolution. This planet at least starts with biological evolution and then technological. And Ray Kurzweil in particular was seizing onto the fact that computational technology evolves rapidly, exponentially. It's Moore's law. Complexity or price performance of computers improving by a factor of 2 every 18 months. And now we're in the beginning of AI era, and there things change fundamentally in time scales of 6 months. Now, I was at the meeting and we were talking about this, and somebody pointed out that on planet Earth, singularity already happened, and it's us. Biological evolution also proceeded exponentially. It took, I don't know, a billion years to get monocellular organisms, and then faster and faster and faster. And first hominids a couple of million years ago, and look where we're now. So biological life intelligences also evolve exponentially, but computer-based intelligence evolves approximately 1,000,000 to 10 million times faster, which is why Kurzweil talks about singularity. Well, it's entirely possible that AIs will be our successor in terms of intelligence evolution on planet Earth. Whether they absorb us in some way, who knows? I'm only hoping that our future AI overlords treat us the way we treat cats and not the way we treat cockroaches. And it's impossible for us to predict. So in AI, we have effectively created an alien intelligence here on this planet because it operates on a completely different set of principles, on different substrate, not biological tissues, but silicon. And most importantly, it thinks differently from us. When we build artificial intelligence, we're not trying to replicate what humans do. We're trying to have a different intelligence that complements the way we do. And an example of this was already seen in things like AlphaGo, where machine has invented new strategies to beat humans that humans have not thought of for the past 2,000 years. And so there are interesting possibilities here. There's going to be at least some kind of symbiotic era between humans and AIs, and maybe AIs can tell us how to recognize alien technosignatures or how to communicate with really advanced minds. If they're interested, maybe they won't be interested. So, at least on this planet, aliens are AIs. Now, of course, Hollywood was trying to warn us about this for a long time. And again, this is the same old projection of human fears that, oh, they'll be just as aggressive as we are. Well, maybe not. They might decide it's an optimal thing to just clean all this biological stuff from the face of the planet Earth. They might, or might not. We have no idea. Anyway, I don't think that any of the Hollywood creations are a good guide to what might happen with the truly advanced intelligence. All right, so let me conclude here. Basically, if you look at imaginings of alien life throughout culture and history, it's essentially mirroring human fears, human experience, human hang-ups, motivation, everything. And basically, aliens that we imagine are just us. We just project our experience and our psyche to what alien creatures from other planets may do. And I think this is due to a profound limit that we just may not have minds, by and large, most of us anyway, that can go beyond human experience. And that is a limit of human cognition. Just like your dogs and cats have limits to their cognition, they can't understand physics, for example. Well, there's stuff that we can't understand either. And there's a possibility that basically AI or its equivalent on other planets becomes the carrier of the intelligence evolution. And what they want to do, we can't possibly imagine. All right, so with that, I'll stop and now I'll take a look at the chat stream and answer your questions. Thank you.
George, Tab and probably all of us would like for you to repost that stream on the document. And then Max has a question way back there asking if in your research you have found any planets that have done photosynthesis.
Okay, here's the link. Wait, did it come through? Here we go, tinyurl.com/technosignatures. The answer to the question is no, I don't do this kind of research, but I'm informed about it, and no, chlorophyll has not been detected yet. I don't think that we're quite yet capable of doing that, but people are definitely thinking about this. We know we can detect water and some organic molecules and some molecules that are often associated with living organisms. Eventually, we might be able to see spectroscopic signatures of chlorophyll. Also, people thinking, can we see signatures of artificial nighttime light illumination? Because it's different from just reflected starlight. Over the next couple of decades, we'll know a lot more about exoplanets. Now, let me scroll all the way back and take questions in order, which I will read and then I will answer. Let's see. As long as you preceded it with capital letters question, I will see them. And if you didn't, go on. Scrolling. Here. Oh no, that's not it.
And George, I just posted a series of questions from Phil. He said he also emailed them to you, but maybe you would like to answer one or two of those in the talk.
Hold on. Tab has question request. Oh yeah, it's time URL. Okay, I'll show that. Here is a question from Ilsa. The US Department of Energy says that 85% of the universe is dark matter, dark energy. Actually, it's more like 95%. Does that make us outliers, and could it be possible we do not see the aliens because of this? Well, since dark energy is probably something entirely different, but dark matter, it's possible that it can develop complexity similar to what regular matter does, but everything we've seen so far is no. The particles that make dark matter probably separated from regular stuff a long time ago, and they only interact gravitationally, which is not sufficient to produce complex structures that electromagnetic interaction can produce through atomic physics, molecular physics. But on the other hand, who knows? I mean, we don't know much more about it, so it's in principle possible that it could be life or maybe intelligence based on dark matter world, but we have no reason to believe this. And okay, so you have question from Phil. What factors of the Drake equation have changed significantly in the last 50 years? Couldn't tell the top of my head, but pretty much all of them have changed in some way. And the Drake equation is nothing especially fundamental. It's just like trivial statement of combined probabilities. And it's not terribly useful in this domain. It was a good thing to put down as a way of thinking about things. Oh, when Frank Drake wrote it down first time, that was about 50, 60 years ago. What is the likelihood that extraterrestrial life will be at all like Earth life? Lots of the same precursors out there, but there are likely many ways to create carbon-based molecules that will support life functions. Yes, other than carbon chains. On the other hand, I think that the odds that we will extinguish ourselves before another species is close enough to physical magnetic ways to understand communications has likely reason, double side, comment. On the other hand, I think that some form of single-celled life that has no idea it is in an ocean covered by ice must be fairly common. Well, yeah, that's true. To comment on the last comment, this is very likely the case. We now know that most, if not all, of Jovian and Saturnian moons probably have underground ocean. Europa and Enceladus are the obvious examples, but now from variety of data analysis, I think that pretty much most of them do. And that will be very interesting, for example, for Io, which has volcanoes. So there's geothermal energy there. Well, we have water, and in Jovian and Saturnian system, there are plenty of carbohydrates. Titan is full of carbohydrates and so on. So yes, I think there's a pretty good chance that we will find some sort of primitive life in Jovian or Saturnian system. Not on Mars necessarily. I think Mars may have done it in the past, but it's been dead for a long time. About more profound question, is the chemistry that gave rise to life on Earth somehow special? I've heard people say things both ways. In some sense, carbon as an element is special, but no other element shows the same richness of chemical or the ways of combining in more complex molecules. Silicon is the equivalent of carbon, one step up in periodic table, but silicon doesn't have nearly as much of chemical richness as carbon does. So maybe carbon is really special. Water as a solvent, well, water is also special in some way because, well, first it's ubiquitous, and second, because the water molecules have slight dipole, electric dipole, which helps. And it's not too much, but just the way the chemical properties of water seem to be conducive to a broader variety of solvent solutions, if you will. Nevertheless, one has to always beware of anthropocentric bias, because that happened here also, right? And this is why scientists study the life in deep thermal vents in the ocean, because they get energy through different ways than creatures on the surface of the planet. And you probably know that there is a lake deep under the ice on Antarctica called Lake Vostok, which is liquid water covered with a couple kilometers of ice. And they drilled down there and they found microorganisms made of usual stuff, carbon, etc., which are unlike any of the microorganisms that we see around us, because that lake was essentially living fossil from I don't know how many millions of years ago before Antarctica was covered by ice. So we're looking for different ways in which life can be functioning in extreme conditions on planet Earth. But that, again, is a smaller spectrum than what's available out there. Okay, question from Baragon. All right, the last bullet point on the slide. Please discuss why we have not seen swarms of self-replicating intelligent machine agents who plunder planets for metal. Well, again, because that's what we would do if we could. Advanced civilizations may simply be not interested in this at all. And if it takes many, many, many years to fly from one star to another, which is entirely possible, why would you even bother with such a thing? Spreading, so to speak, your own pollution across the galaxy. Or maybe they do. And people speculate there could be dormant self-replicating robot factories in the asteroid belt or something like that. But it is essentially, again, another projection of what humans like to do. Well, there is a country with, or continent with resources that we could use. Well, let's just go and plunder it, and we can kill any natives that come in try to stop us. Okay, Julie answered Phil. Okay, question from Bon Crescendo. Is it plausible that life has existed elsewhere in the solar system and it will exist again elsewhere, but we are alone right now, implying that we cease to exist before we make contact? Well, yeah, that's possible. I mean, there was very likely life on Mars before it lost its atmosphere and the water froze. And we might even find some evidence of it with all the probes that we're sending. And then question from Ariane. Humans always had wars. Even now, we have been afraid of invasion by alien, but when we get hyperdrive, which is a complete fiction, is there any possibility we'll be intruders? What do you think? Well, you tell me how to make a hyperdrive and then I'll answer your question. I think that's just a Deus ex machina invention for science fiction to make it possible to have a plot of interstellar travel. There may or may not be any such a possibility. Another question from Brioni. Do you think there is a minimum size to intelligent life? Probably, because again, you need a certain degree of complexity. And there are no intelligent bacteria because they can just barely survive. And took evolution of planet Earth many millions of years to produce mammals with brains, although even flies have brains of sorts, but it's just to kind of keep them, to survive them, keep them survive. I think for culture and intelligence, the one experiment we know of on planet Earth is, well, it took human level of complexity to develop such things. And maybe you can shrink it down. Certainly, if you start talking about artificial intelligence, you can probably shrink it down substantially. But at some point, you need enough atoms and whatever else, connections and so on, to make complex things happen inside that structure. So there's got to be some kind of lower limit to that. And I think I went through all of the posted questions. All right, so with that, we'll call it a day. Feel free to reach out if you have any specific questions, and thank you for coming.